Hi, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight. I'd like to start by saying that I was a teacher in the Springfield Public Schools for 6 years, and I founded Veritas. I assembled a team to do that because I truly believed that all of the students in our school were capable of achieving at far higher levels than they were. And the school was founded in that belief. They are. Our students have been extraordinarily successful compared to their peers, and we need more schools like that here in Springfield and Holyoke. So this ballot question is about access and equity. It is about providing equal access to quality public schools in the districts that need them most, like Springfield and like Holyoke. Over the past 20 years, charter schools have filled this need for quality public schools in Massachusetts in our urban districts. So charters are required to administer all of the same assessments to their students, and they're held to incredibly high expectations and accountability standards. We must be better than our sending districts. It's the expectation that we raise the bar. Sadly, 50% of the children in Massachusetts who are in urban districts are attending an underperforming school. That number is closer to 100% in Springfield. And many of these schools have been failing for decades. So in contrast, 0% of the children, none of the children who are attending charter schools in urban districts in Massachusetts are attending an underperforming school. Every urban charter school is a level 1 or level 2 school. Yet growth of charter schools is limited by an arbitrary cap that leaves more than 30,000 students on waiting lists, and we have more than 3,000 students on waiting lists here in Springfield. Maybe we can afford to wait, but these children cannot. These quality public school options can provide choice for these families who need it, for children who would be zoned to a failing school, and for children who will not achieve in spite of their school, who need good schools. There are a lot of scare tactics out there, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about what this ballot question, if passed, will do and what it will not do. So what it will do, it will allow, not demand, not command, but allow the Board of Education the flexibility to approve the expansion of existing schools like Veritas or new charter schools in communities that have reached their cap, provided that the school district is among the lowest 25% in the state. So if there is need in a community and there is demand in a community, and if the application is strong enough to get through the rigorous process in our state, then it would allow the flexibility to increase up to 12 new schools or expansions a year, 12. The focus is on districts where the schools are failing, and all of the charter school laws and regulations that currently make our charter schools the best in the nation will stay in place. What it will not do, it will not authorize 12 schools opened anywhere at any time by anyone. And this ballot question will not open the floodgates for new charter schools. There are currently 70 in the state, and on average 4 are approved each year. So there are never 12 being approved each year anyway. But this would allow some flexibility in districts that need it for some more quality school options for families. So the ballot question is about providing choice to families who can't pick up and move to the suburbs where the schools are better. It's about equity and access to quality public schools. It's about making a public education the equalizer that it should be. And it's about providing a basic civil rights for our most underserved kiddos in the state. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shannon, and thank you, Rachel. I know your advocacy and your passion about this subject is very evident in the way you speak on behalf of it, so thank you for joining us. My name is Jake Oliveira. I am president of the Massachusetts Association of School Committees. It represents over 300 school committees across Massachusetts, as well as many different types of schools, including vocational, technical education schools here in the Commonwealth. We have over 2,000 members, and we represent the hundreds of thousands of students that are enrolled right now in our public schools. The ballot question at hand that I think has generated quite a lot of energy and discussion throughout Massachusetts really comes down to, as Rachel had mentioned before, equity. But I'd also add another piece on it, accountability. On the equity side, funding continues to be one of the greatest challenges for our public schools. Most recently, the Chapter 70 Foundation Budget Commission recommended that nearly $2 billion needs to be invested in our public schools in order to get us to an adequately level playing field for the children of Massachusetts. That $2 billion has nothing to do with this question before us tonight. I know that many of you have seen some of the advertisements that have been on TV where a very grandfatherly voice comes on and says, charter schools means expansion, or question 2 means more money for public schools. I can tell you, it might as well be Donald Trump saying that, because it is absolutely false. This question has nothing to do with funding. This question has to do with raising a cap that's placed upon our charter schools right now that is draining important tax dollars away from our public schools in Massachusetts. Let me just give you a brief example. So I'm from over across the bridge in Ludlow, where we send, out of our 2,800 student district, about 20 students last year to public charter schools here in the Springfield area. That costs our district close to $400,000 a year for a classroom filled with students. As the Yes on 2 side had mentioned in the past, the state does reimburse districts for a certain percentage of that amount that is taken away from the local school district. For Ludlow, that's a little bit over $100,000, meaning that we're left with a $300,000 hole for a classroom filled with students, and they're not just in one grade. So you can't simply, cut a position here or cut a position there. The districts need to absorb that. You want to talk about the impact on an urban school district like right here in Springfield or Boston, tack on a few extra zeros to that $300,000, and that's the impact to our public schools in a lot of our urban areas. The funding issue is essential to this question, but it is not the only issue that we have with it. The second very important issue that we have is dealing with accountability. Charter schools do not operate as traditional public schools do, where their dollars that come in are managed by locally elected school committee members like myself and people that the community put on there to be their voices. They have boards of trustees that are held accountable to no one. Their boards of trustees are held accountable to themselves and once in a while to the Board of Elementary and Secondary Education. We need here in Massachusetts to hold these charter schools accountable. We've talked about reforms. We've talked about reforms in order to raise the cap. However, the charter school industry does not want to come to the table to discuss that at all. We've talked about it. We've been leading the way for change, and we find that it is not a right move to raise a cap right now. We also feel another issue that's about it is looking at who are the supporters of question 2 and who are the opponents. The NAACP of New England is against question 2. The NAAC chapter right here in Springfield and Boston and Worcester are all against chapter 2 right now. Over 170 school committees here in Massachusetts have acted and taken a no vote. Can you guess how many actually voted to support question 2? 0. Many city councils, many mayors, many elected officials have taken positions against this, and also Mayor Walsh of Boston, who was a charter school proponent and helped found a charter school, is against this question. If you want to talk about it a little bit more, we can talk about it, but I think my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both. What passion. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. Oh, thank you. The first is, can you describe the oversight charters have by their local school committees? Rachel, I'll give you that.
Thank you. So charter schools, the deal with charter schools is they're given high levels of autonomy with high accountability. So this idea that they're not accountable is totally untrue. So the Board of Education, first of all, approves the charter through a very rigorous process. And the governing body is a board of trustees, and they are all volunteers, and they are all from this community, or the community wherever the charter school is. And those people are considered in-kind employees of the state. So they are required to produce conflict of interest statements and all sorts of go through trainings, and they are overseen by the Board of Elementary and Secondary Ed, not once in a while, but consistently throughout every year. The Board of Elementary Elementary Ed sends a team of visitors to our school, to any charter school, every single year, does a site visit. The schools are required to have an independent audit firm come in and do an audit. So the regulations and oversight over charter schools are far greater than any district school I've ever worked in, is the truth. But yeah, it's a system outside of the big system that controls public education. So it's a huge threat, and it's something different that school committees don't have control over. So that's really scary.
I'd be happy to direct all of you to look at an Annenberg study that looked at the boards of trustees of the charter schools here in Massachusetts. 60% of charter school boards don't have a single parent representation on them from that district, 60%. There are charter schools, and if you look at the study recently done within the city of Boston to look at the boards of trustees of those charter schools, it actually showed on there that a majority of those trustees didn't come from the city of Boston. They didn't come from parents that are part of that public school system or have a vested interest in their community. They came from suburbs like Weston and Wellesley and other areas that are outside of the actual Boston school system. And if you look here at Springfield, you can look at the very boards of trustees that are here. I can bet you any amount of money that the amount of people from Longmeadow, the amount of people that from Hamden, and maybe even a few people from Ludlow sit on those boards. And very few of them actually represent the community. As a school committee member who actually, fields calls from parents, that fields calls from a lot of people within the community, not having parent representation or having a voice on there of the governing board that a parent could call up, that a parent could say, listen, this is what's happening with my child, I feel really is against the foundation of what we've built for education in this country, which is about making sure that local decision-making, local choices, local involvement bubbles up into the public school system. I think it's the foundation of our democracy. And when you have these public charter schools that are out there that are operating with a board of trustees that doesn't reflect the community, then I feel, we're really not representing the true democratic process of education that we've established for hundreds of years.
So the funding follows the students. Just like any other school choice option for families, the funding follows the students. So the state allocates a certain amount of money for every public school student in Massachusetts, and that money goes to that student's district or school. And it works the same way with charter schools. The only difference, actually, with charter schools is that because of the strong opposition from teachers' unions and school committees and the system that exists right now, it was negotiated into the charter school law that the districts would be reimbursed. So unlike, school choice in other ways, when a child goes to a charter school, the district gets reimbursed. And for 6 years. So for the first year, 100% of the tuition goes to the district, though the child doesn't. The child goes to a charter school. And for 5 more years, the district, so 6 total years, 100% the first year, and 25% for 5 more years. So we have students who graduated from our 8th grade last year and who are freshmen at SciTech or Commerce or Central right now, in honors and AP classes, by the way, on a path to college, where the district is still being reimbursed for those children, and they're not at Veritas, they're at Central High School, so the district is getting 100% of their tuition for being 9th graders at Central, and still getting a reimbursement for having attended a charter school. So, there is some loss of funding, I get that, I understand, what you're describing, but it was certainly exaggerated, and the money should go with the child.
Is the amount spent per child the same for out-of-district as sending the students to charters? It is to a certain extent. So I would like to correct a little bit of something that Rachel had just said. It is true that we do get funding reimbursement at the local district level, but the last time it was fully funded by the Commonwealth it's been 5 years. So most districts are only paying out right now in that first year of funding what they're actually getting for reimbursement rates. Hence the gap that we have in Ludlow, hence the $450 million gap we have here throughout the many districts in the Commonwealth. When it comes to actual students, the money following the students, let's just say the cost doesn't follow the student as well. The cost is borne by the district every time a student leaves the district for something else. I'll give a perfect example of one way in which we pay tuitions out. We send students to vocational technical high schools here in Massachusetts. Those vocational technical high schools are paid for in part by the sending district sending tuition payments to that school. Right here in Springfield, we have the METGO program, but like the charter school issue, the state does kick in some reimbursement dollars for that. But as far as the vocational schools and as far as the METCO program is concerned, it gets back to that accountability piece. Each one of those schools has a board that's elected that represents the community of that sending district. So that is not the case with the charter schools and the reimbursement and the funding for it. When the student follows on over, the accountability from that local district, from local oversight, goes out the window.
Thank you. So I have in front of me, Rachel Romano stated that there are no underperforming charter schools. What would she say, you say, Rachel, about the 2 in Springfield that had their charters revoked because they were failing? Go ahead.
I would say true that. They had their charters revoked because they weren't performing. Absolutely, and this is the difference. See, I worked at a district school that chronically underperforming for decades. I think at one point it was one of the worst in the state. That school is still open, and it's still one of the worst in the state. And it is 10 years later. Those charter schools you're talking about in Springfield, it's kind of sad that 2 did close in Springfield, but they closed because they weren't doing the right things. That doesn't happen with our district schools. And, you know, I have to defend my board a little bit. They're local people. We have parents on our board. I don't know about the schools in Boston and what the report said, but it does bring control really local to the school level. And in a way that when I was a teacher in a district school, control and decisions were not made at the school level. They weren't made for the students who sat in front of us or for the parents who sent them to us every single day. They weren't. They were made by a central office that made those decisions, and it was a very compliance-driven environment. It didn't work for kids. It doesn't work for kids, and that's the reality. So if we're talking about serving children, and if we're talking about doing right by the thousands of children that we're failing every single year here in Springfield and in Holyoke, then we have to think a little differently about what's happening.
Thank you. I'd love to, as Jake, you come up, I would love to ask this question. Do you think it is fair that special percentages in charter schools are much lower than public schools?
Well, I think it, but I'd like to answer that, but I want to go back to that question before to talk about actual accountability. And assessment is something that we talk about before. I don't know how most people assess things, but I don't just simply look at a standardized test score on how someone performs on the MCAS test or a new park on there. What I look at is persistent rates over time. I look at the attrition rates when they go to college, the percentage of students that are taking remedial courses once they enter one of our community colleges or state universities. And actually there is in the MIT report that I know that the charter schools have cited before, it looks into that a bit, and it looks at the persistent rates and the graduation rates of college after from sending districts and from charter schools. And there's very little difference in the success rates of students who attend a charter school versus a local public school. So I think the difference in there is not so much, it's much more on the standardized test side rather than on the actual success side of our students over time. But getting back to the question that you just read, could you read it again for me, please?
Sure. Do you think it is fair that special percentages in charter schools are much lower than public schools?
Yes.
I'm so sorry.
Yep, and you know what, and Rachel will come up here and she'll say that her charter schools and charter schools across Massachusetts reflect the sending district's percentage of ELL students, the same percentage of students that might have a disability. However, the severity is very different. The public schools right now are literally locked in with the most severe students with the most severe needs. You know, you can have, you know, defining a student of disabilities is a large spectrum. You can have a slight learning disability, or you could have some very severe disabilities that require a one-on-one educator per student. The districts, unfortunately, particularly in the highly urbanized districts that have large populations of students with disabilities, the difference between those students is vast. And it seems that the charter schools find themselves with students with lower level disabilities rather than the public schools who have the much more needy students that they have have to educate. The other difference I would like to say on there is dealing with mobile and transient students. You know, students get on a lottery to go into a charter school right now. Mobile and transient students that are affected right here in the city of Springfield and in Holyoke and throughout the Pioneer Valley, they're not reflected in any statistic, but everybody who's been in a classroom understands how difficult it is to educate one of those students. And the public students, the public schools are the schools where those students are being housed right now because they come in sometimes mid-year without the adequate resources that are necessary. And so our teachers are struggling with that.